Welcome back to another episode. My name is Jessica Hover. My friends call me Jess.
I'm Lane Dealing-Churland, and this is Very Good Enough, a podcast from Very Good Mothers Club.
Today's episode is with Lily Hagen, who is a friend who is the founder of Lingo Plaza, a really amazing platform and community that helps bilingual families to raise up children who speak Spanish fluently. And I used it myself with Eloise, and now we're about to start using it with Wilson. He turned 4, so that's like the age she says to go for it. And I think the kind of thing that came up is this idea that my normal and your normal might be different. And especially if we're coming from different cultures, our normals are different. And that's a really beautiful thing. But if you don't know anything about a different culture, you have no idea what someone else's normal is.
Mm-hmm. And she gets in at the end to this cool idea of understanding that like your culture and what you care about is going to play differently for your child because their experience is different from yours. Yeah. So for her, she's from Colombia, and she is gifting her children with a lot of understanding and like beautiful experiences from her culture and her life and her country and her family. And yet they're not from Colombia. Mm-hmm. They're bicultural children, and their experience of culture will be different from hers and from one another. She has these 2 children who will draw differently from their bicultural experience, and she speaks to that with a lot of respect, which I love, and I think that's obviously very directly pertinent to the kind of experience she's describing, but also there's a lot in that value for everyone's life experience. Totally. You know, like that's going to be true for everyone, that like whatever your values and your experience of your life, cultural, familial, personal, like you're going to gift as much of that as you can to your children, and they're going to take what's for them and they're going to add their own life experience to it and carry on in a way that's different. And if we can love that about them and celebrate that in them, then we're just going to have richer relationships.
Totally. And what a complicated thing we get to do as parents, because you're loving and giving with your whole heart, whole body, whole everything. Yeah. And then you're really having to let go at the same time and trust that they will get what they need and they will choose what is for them, and the rest they won't, and like to be okay with that. Yeah. And there's like a stage of development, right, where their peers relationship, their relationship with the people that they're around who are around their same age is very significant in identity building. Absolutely. And so then at that stage, I've heard from parents raising bilingual kids that at that time is sort of another window where they might get resistant about the language, because if their peer group isn't speaking the language, they're really looking for some sense of identity within their peers. So yeah, it really shifts, because then I would imagine those same kids, like they go through their teenage years, in their 20s, they're going to be like, wait, what? Language? Like I can travel and use this tool, and it's so amazing. Lily's wonderful. Lingo Plaza has been really, really beneficial to me. So this is like a friendly ad, but not really. This is just because I like it.
So we'll see you on the other side.
Lily, who are you and what are you doing in life right now?
Well, I am first a mom, a wife, and I am the founder of Lingo Plaza, which is a language and cultural learning platform for kids. We empower families to raise bilingual kids through educational resources, one of them being life lessons with tutors from Latin America.
Tell me about life pre-starting Lingo Plaza, because what brought you to now this mission to help families raise bilingual children, and just everything you're doing. Rewind us a little bit to tell us where this began.
I'd say everything really started when I was young in Colombia. I'm from Colombia. I guess I should have said that. I was born and raised there. And there you learn English since you're like pretty much in preschool. Like that's something that you learn. It's part of the subjects, that mandatory subjects, in fact. So you're exposed to the language, and it just always fascinated me. And like, I remember the first time I came to the US, I was 4, which is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't, in my little brain, I couldn't comprehend like what it was to go to LA. And I just picture a whole lot of angels for some reason. That's how my mind was working.
Los Angeles, it makes sense.
Yes. And I was 4. It was my first time traveling. And just, seeing people differently, speaking a different language, the language that I've been studying in school. I always found it fascinating how, obviously I didn't think it that way back then, like how my normal is now the normal for somebody else. So I think that's what kind of like started this passion. And then I was part of an international school. So we had a lot of people from the US and around the world come to the school. It was part of also a nonprofit. So I was always surrounded by different cultures. And I think that exposure really enlightened this love. Now, fast forward, I work for a nonprofit. I was able to travel with them. I went to Asia. I was able to teach Spanish and English. And I learned, I really believe that once you learn a different language and you go to different countries, your brain just changes. Your perspective of everything, life changes. And I think that's what really happened to me. And I just wanted to marry an American. And I did.
Nice.
He is from South Dakota. Never thought I was going to marry somebody from South Dakota, I'll tell you that. But then, we have kids, and I figure we both are bilingual. I knew I wanted my kids to learn the language. But I live in the US. I never really understood how hard it would be because my perspective has always been in my country, learning as a student, where they teach you. And then as a teacher, then raising and being a parent, it's more about bilingual parenting. And that is, parenting in the way it is, you're still navigating in. Now, add another language and culture. That there were a lot of pain points that we needed to solve. And I started facing the pushback from my kids. I'm like, how do people do this? And there were not really a lot of resources. So that's kind of like what started everything. And the more I talked to families, the more they had the same issues. So I decided to do it because for some reason I discovered my kids were reacting, using the language more with people that were, that's not mom or, and they just start interacting easier with some other people. It's the same thing with my students. I noticed how connected they were when I was teaching. So it's like, okay, this might be the thing. They might need somebody aside from mom and dad bringing the language input. So that was a long story, but that's pretty great. Much, I'd say, what brought Lingo Plaza to fruition, I'd say.
That's beautiful. One thing that you said that I really love, and I feel like is going to be kind of a theme as we talk, is that my normal isn't necessarily somebody else's normal. By exposing ourselves to different cultures and different languages, we're getting to see a variety of normals, which is such a gift. It teaches us so much about life and actually enhances life in a way that we often don't even know we're missing because we don't know what's out there beyond what we have right in front of us. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I wonder, just on a personal note, with you and your husband doing cross-cultural relationship, marriage, raising kids, like you said, there's a lot of complexity just in parenting. But what kinds of issues have you guys seen come up just as you're navigating two different upbringings and then loving each other and raising these kids? I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to this.
Yes. Thankfully, one of the things that was really important to me, I think that in my journey, since I was able to travel at such a young age, I knew how important it was for whoever I married, even though it was not from Colombia, to understand my culture. I needed somebody that had connections somehow, so that they could understand why I am the way I am, my love for my country. It was very important. It really is key that whoever you're with, if this a multicultural marriage, that both of you understand both cultures or have been in touch with them too, because humans are complex the way it is. Let's not even go from Colombia and the US. Just marriage, marrying somebody with a different upbringing, it's already different. Now bring culture nuances and, different things from culture. That's even another layer So it was a big deal. That being said, I think that having that in mind helps us navigate when we have differences, and we still do.
Sure.
But I think that what's important, and I think that's just relationships in general, it's having a mindset of, am I willing to sacrifice this? Like compromise, I say. For me, and from speaking about Colombia specifically, we're extremely proper. Like, please, thank you. Like, we go the extra miles. And that's a big deal to us there. To where perhaps some things, even in Latin America, some other countries might be a little more casual. To me, is if I am here, I don't expect that at all. Like, I already know the culture. However, my household, since we're raising two bicultural kids, we kind of have to equally give the value to both cultures. Like, this is not more important than this. And in the end, they choose from each one which one they want to identify with. On their own, finding their own way, how they absorb both cultures. But I think that it's important to agree that in the house, you have to present it equally as valuable. Yeah. So you learn to compromise things. You know, it doesn't matter. Like if burping is a big deal to me, which it is.
You know, just for example.
just so you guys know, it is like, or my daughter, it's like, oh, my mom doesn't fart. I'm like, oh, I love that you think that.
I mean, say that too.
Good at farting is what that means.
It's like, you don't do that in public. Still a big deal. If I go somewhere, I get it. But I'm like, in my house, it's like, respect that. That's the one thing. I'm like, it's easier to say, even if I don't care, it's like, okay, I'll respect that because it's not a big deal to me. And I think that's when we learn to compromise. If it's a big deal to you and really affects you, I respect that, even if it doesn't really bother me. So that's kind of like how you do it, I guess. And I'm still doing it, to be honest. I mean, it's something that you still learn.
Right. Yeah. How did you meet this man, and how did you guys come to know that like you shared these values for respecting one another's values?
Funny thing, it was through the nonprofit, and we were completely separate. I mean, not even the same country, but somehow with this nonprofit, you know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. He was part of a team that came to Colombia, and it was when Facebook was not that, I mean, it was big, but you still have connections that you didn't have 3,000 friends. It was
very,
that's kind of, yeah. And he traveled. So I think that we had the same mindset.
I think that's so cool. Something that I didn't know until I worked in the international nonprofit world. So I was seeing like grown-ups navigating family life with multiple cultures. I didn't really understand that it could be hard. Like I thought like marriage is hard. We know that. But I didn't realize that adding the different cultures really does make it different, because I mean, even for one, like your heart language, when you are thinking your thoughts, it takes a long time before you start thinking primary thoughts in a secondary language. And so like when there's heightened emotions, these couples would have to figure out, how are we going to communicate very raw emotion in a language that makes sense? And then you speak it, and maybe you both choose English. Like a lot of times the couples in my life would be like, I mean, really close friends of mine, their primary languages would be like French and Korean, and they're navigating their relationship in English. Wow. And so then you're not only dealing with cultural differences and pressures that different cultures have, which I didn't understand it. But in certain parts of the world, there's a lot more pressure to be really close with your parents and your grandparents. Close, like proximity, close. And in some cultures, there's a lot of pressure to be super educated and look like you have it all together. And that's not just like general perfectionism. It's like the entire culture functions in that way. And so when you take these things that are just sort of like underwritten in the culture, but another culture doesn't know that that's the way they do it, and then you fall in love and you come together and you're doing all your stuff, and then things start to bubble out of you, that stuff gets really complicated. And then you add raising children to the mix, and it's a whole thing. So anyway, I think one thing that you guys had going for you, it sounds like, is the fact that he was already traveling and you're already traveling. Mm-hmm. So you already had an awareness that cultures are different. And you probably had some like studying that you had to do. I remember I had to like take a class on international studies and understand like warm culture and cold culture and what these different things mean. For many families, they're not going to get the opportunity to travel, especially right now in this sort of like recession, inflation time. I hear a lot of families be like, I would love to go see a different country or place, but can't pull it off. I know that you have some tips for families on how they could introduce awareness of other cultures right there from where they are. Would you speak to that right now?
I mean, what you were saying is completely right. Humanity itself is complex. Now add upbringings and being raised in different country and raising kids. So, but I think that that's being graceful. And that's when it comes the whole mindset of it might not be the normal, but it's normal for them. It might not be mine. And just be graceful that way, because it is not weird. It's just different. And I mean, I think that the US particular is so diverse that you have access to so many cultures. And if you're looking into teaching the language, one, you don't have to be fluent to do it. You just need to give them enough exposure. It's about the exposure, not the fluency that you as a parent have. Obviously, if you speak Spanish or whatever language, French or any language you want, if you're speaking constantly to your child, then they have more exposure. But it's about being resourceful and the experience. And I think as a mother, since we face a lot of rejection towards the language in particular, there's a lot of pushback because it's not the community language, it's the target language right now. So it's only spoken at home. For a child, it's normal to see, well, my friends don't speak that. Like, why would I need this? You know, so start with obviously dependent on the age, just start with the why. Instead of like just making it happen to your child. Like suddenly things are happening and changing different language. What's going on here? Talk to your child. Talk about countries. Take them to food is one of my favorite resources to use to bring exposure to cultures, because I think that cultures express so well through it, from cuisine to techniques to events to holidays celebrated. It really speaks a lot about the culture. And for example, that's why you see Latinos always gathering as a family and making events for the heck of making events, you know, because we love gathering in families. So, and the food, it's a matter of like making food together or, you know, things like that. I think that that's a way to do it. There are plenty of bilingual books that you can start reading. If it's something that you're just navigating, I wouldn't say go from 0 to 100. That can be too shocking, you know, for your child. If it's not something that they're comfortable with yet, I would start little exposure with books, start with music, start using words at home, you know, even if it's vocabulary. The key of learning, honestly, a language is repetition. So if you do that at home, and actually there was a study that you need like about 17 times in a different context for your brain to actually retain information. So like if you learn door in Spanish, you gotta use it in different ways, through music, through books, through just be creative and make it enjoyable. I think that that's the biggest thing, because it is the target language. It's something that is not happening outside of your home, but you're bringing it. So you need to make it exciting for your child to look appealing. And it will happen. Don't beat yourself up for your child not wanting to do it. I mean, they're not going to want to do a lot of things anyways when it comes to learning. Then you're the parent and you know, and that will click for them eventually. And I see it with my 11-year-old. When he speaks with my mom, it's like, yes, it was worth it. Like it's getting there. Because it's a challenge.
Honestly, I'll plug Lingo Plaza because I used it with Eloise. So we lived in Spain for a couple of years. So she learned very basic Spanish as she was learning English. So she was set up with a good foundation. But then when we got back here, she did not want to use Spanish at all. Like even at the playground, there would be children who spoke Spanish because there's a lot of Spanish speaking going on in LA. But the kids would switch to English, even though they both knew how to talk in Spanish. And so it was a long process of like, okay, let's try. And then Cammie told me about Lingo Plaza. And so we started Eloise doing your program, and it was so fun. It was funny. Sean was watching, and he's like, it's almost like taking her to Chuck E. Cheese or something. Like your instructors, yeah, they like play and sing, and it's a really interactive experience. So then fast forward, we were trying to get Eloise into a public school that has a Spanish immersion program because I really felt like she already has this language. It would be a gift I could give her to keep the language. Even though she didn't want it. She didn't think it was important. So then in order to get into this program, she had to test in. And they said the only way we could let her in because she was getting in late was if she could test at fluent for her age. And so I had her doing Lingo Plaza so much, and thankfully it's fun, so she wasn't bummed about this. But by the time she took the test, she tested in at fluent, and I fully attribute that to you because she wouldn't have done that. I mean, months prior, I couldn't even get her to speak. So anyway, it's a really great program. And now we're about to start Wilson doing it because I think you said 4 years old is like the kind of the best age to start what you have to offer. Is that right?
Yes, right now we have the lessons in particular are for 4 to 12. We are starting a newsletter because we want to be able to help parents with their journey until we're able to get to preschool. If you have babies, start them right now with music. Like like don't wait. It's easier for them, for your relationship with them, but in the brain, the way they learn, it's so much easier if they're exposed at such a young age as if you're pregnant. If you follow us on Lingo Plaza, I'm mostly behind it, and you can ask questions. And we send newsletters with like resources for parents to use at home, because even though you take the lessons with us, you still want to do something at home to support that, so the more they practice, the better it is.
Yeah. What was the process like for you in developing your program for different like ages and stages? Like how did you guys break that down and build that?
So we had to based it on the curriculums here, the standards. And I'm very grateful that I had the experience that I had. I think that coming from the student perspective and the teacher perspective really helped me nail down how the kids, what was engaging, what was happening, because I needed to create something fun. I needed for them to speak the language. It was the battle. Like that's the hardest thing, having speak it, but I needed to make it in a way that to be fun. I taught kids in Asia and Europe, and it was all immersion. So the techniques that I learned, all that really helped me build that curriculum. And it was all now a matter of transferring all of that knowledge into technology. I wish I could say, it was a piece of cake.
Well, something I told Lane that I learned through working with you guys, but then also prior to that when we were in Spain for 2 years, watching the way Eloise was learning Spanish, was that it's so visual, and it's not translating English to Spanish. So like sometimes people would find out that Eloise is learning Spanish and she's little, right? They would say to her, okay, well, say door. And she wouldn't say anything because that skill is actually translation. That's not speaking Spanish. But if you say like, como se dice door, or like, actually just como se dice and point to a door, then she could say puerta. But it was this idea that like what they're learning is looking at a thing and communicating what that thing is, not taking the English version and translating it to Spanish. And that was actually different for me to understand. I didn't realize that was like the best way. And even for myself, that was the best way for me to be learning Spanish, was immersed in it, visually seeing what's going on, and then hearing what is the name of this. And that's the way we teach babies how to speak anyway. Right. This is a table, table, point to the table, touch the table, feel the table, bang your head on the table. Oh, you hit the table. That's so sad. I'm sorry. Right. It's all this visual and taking it in and then speaking it out. And so then if you take like little kids and you're trying to teach them, even if you're like me, a parent who doesn't have a lot of the other language, but I care a lot about the other language, then you can be reading books together, pointing to the words, watching shows. A lot of my friends who learned English from European countries or Asian countries, they were like, oh, I just watched all your movies and I didn't translate them. Sometimes I had English subtitles on while I watched them, and just gradually I would understand like what they're doing is that. And so then I started doing it with my kids too. And there is pushback, but I think the key is once they start to understand that a lot more people speak the language, like for Eloise, once she got around other kids speaking that language, it's like the language is not anymore a language. It's a key to making friends. It's here. Now you have access to way more friends. Friends are fun. You're going to like this. This is really cool.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, one of the things that you mentioned in there, Lily, that you also have been sort of nudging at is the resistance that can come from like this thing that my mom wants me to do, which, you know, like embedding it in a context, making it useful for them is of course going to be very motivating. But can you share with us, have you experienced, I'm sure that you have, some resistance from your children in doing this thing? Maybe even because it's so important to you?
Yeah. And that's actually a question someone asked Lily. She said, I have a toddler son. I keep trying to speak Spanish with him. Both parents are bilingual, but they're speaking English at home, not Spanish. And so when they try to read books or speak to him in Spanish, he's getting really frustrated. And he is 3.
I think it goes from the same thing as from 0 to 100. Each kid learns differently. And the reality is that your kid is always going to have persistence with things. It's up to you as a parent also to guide your child to, you know, like, for example, my son loves football. Sometimes doesn't like practicing, but they love communicating and with my mom and they love Colombia, rooting for Colombia, but perhaps the work of not like the process of learning it right away is not as appealing. I think that the mindset of seeing the language as a subject kind of has to shift. And we call it bilingual parenting. Focus on the relationship over anything else. So we are a support. Like what we see at Lingo Plaza, we're like, why we support the families, and we're a great tool to have that active learning, because it's a lot. You need help. I'm gonna tell you, even me being Colombian, being born and raised, speaking fluently, it is hard if you don't have resources. And it depends, like think about your goal. Is my goal for my kid to get to fluency, or is my goal for my child to learn a couple words, to travel, you know? And that question yourself, and then that will require the effort, because it's gonna take work. It's not gonna be easy, and I'm gonna say it that way. It takes an effort, and just like parenting. But I think that you gotta think about it from a perspective as a parent. How can I relate to my child in this way? And now talk to them. It's like, what is gonna be meaningful to them? You mentioned the friends. That was a big deal for Elise. For my kids is talking to my family and talking to their aita. They love their abuelita, their grandma. They adore her. And it's just so nice to see them speak Spanish without me having to say, speak Spanish, or do, you know? I think that whatever is valuable to them, present them that way. In the case of a toddler, what kind of interests your toddler have? Like, does he like dinosaurs? Introduce the language in that way. Introduce the language in a positive way that is comfortable for them. And perhaps if you find a community, I say you need to find a community with parents that are the same journey. Why? Because you have ups and downs, and a lot of times you're like, oh, is this even working? Like, is this what? Because there's resistance, and it happens. I'm telling you, it happens, but it clicks. And a lot of the parents that I talk to that have teenagers, they say it was so worth it, and the teenagers understand and are grateful that their parents, you know, raise them bilingual. So I think that focus on your relationship as a parent and navigate that your way, find resources that fit your family as well. And then find a resource like, let's say, Lingo Plaza with life lessons that can inject and kind of like give you more power to that effort and journey, and make it more normal, aside from this is what my parents are bringing and nobody else is doing it. So I hope that answered the
That's
question.
good. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that integration. I'm all about like, how can we stop splitting up all the things about parenting or about life into separate subjects or like compartmentalized entities? Because really we're just people living this life, sort of flowing through it. And everything you do with your child just is a relationship that is unfolding. And we talk about their development and their skills and stuff as separate pieces because we need that in order to understand. Like that's just how we think about stuff. But that's not real, right? They're like in this very fluid, organic motion of growing, kind of more like a plant than like the way that we think about a student, right? They're like organic matter, and our relationships are so everything's interwoven into it. So I love that. And I love the idea that like, of course you're meeting resistance from your 3-year-olds. You're meeting resistance from your 3-year-old about everything, including language learning, right? It's not like, oh, I added this one thing and now sometimes we have this frustration. It's like your child is differentiating from you and growing a sense of self, and they're going to find things in their life to like rub up against you and pull away from you and come back together with you to learn about themselves. And this is just additionally one of those things.
Yeah, that's right.
So getting to say like, not like, oh no, they don't like it, we should stop, but being like, no, this is something that I've decided is like really good for them. That's important to me. So it's going to be here in your life and we're going to navigate around and fold it in, my sweet child.
Exactly. I think that people need to see as a parenting plan as well. Like bilingually, this is a way that we're going to parent, because I think that and I say it is very relevant right now. Even before, when I was raised bilingual, my parents didn't speak English. My mom understands more than she speaks. And I learned a lot, yes, through my school, but then I found those experiences and resources. And so I think that also contributed to Lingo Plaza, that I knew I was trying to find what worked. And I think that as a parent, you need to find that as well. So like perhaps the books are not working right now, but maybe you start creating little routines, something that is good night, put a little song that is fun for them. That is, it could be the sandwich, an example. So like something that we say is, yes, don't translate. They are very smart unless it gets to like a new context. Like I say, if you are able to put things in context, that's the best way to do it. I mean, you are supposed to learn a second language naturally too. Don't think of it differently. And think about, how did I learn English when I was little? Modeling, parents model things. What you were saying, when you say this is, well, no, this is not a card, but this is a mug. This is a mug. You're telling them mug. This is the mug, like start slowly, like if I tell my kids something that I learned from high school, it will go over the head, like I need to meet them where their language is in their brain. So they might be 11, but they might have a different level. So don't expect for them to respond to you the way they will respond in English, because their level of language is not as advanced to the other language. And try to find ways to make it equally valuable at home. So if you use the English a lot, if you use English a lot, then how can you bring Spanish in the same way? Like show that both are important in this house, and your kid will see it that way, because you're the parent. So you're teaching them about life and that's going to be part of your little subculture family. This is what is valuable to you as a family, being bilingual and learning about this culture, learning Spanish. This is what we find valuable as a family, and communicate that with your child, obviously in a way that your 3-year-old adult can understand. But then the older they get, they will make those connections for sure.
Yeah. And really practically, you can switch the shows that you watch, like on Netflix or I don't know, whatever your streaming service people are using, you can switch it from English to Spanish. And so sometimes with my kids, I've been like, okay, well, we can watch a screen right now, but we're going to watch in Spanish. So we can either watch in Spanish or no screen. They always choose Spanish. They're like, we're doing screen time. Right. But then it's gotten to the point where some shows, they prefer the Spanish version. They like it more. And so that even to me is like, okay, cool. You're really understanding. And then with Eloise, what was really interesting was going through a stage where she stopped realizing if it was English or Spanish. Like I would just turn it on in Spanish, and I was used to her being like, oh, I don't want this one. And then it just played and she watched it. And then after I was like, so babe, which one did you just watch? And she's like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, cool. we're getting somewhere.
That's in there.
Yeah. So I feel like shows are a great way. And I recently saw a video from a girl on Instagram. I think her handle might be like your therapist mom friend or something. She makes good stuff. But she was talking about how books can build empathy in young kids. She was saying like there's two kinds of books is what she said. Maybe you already know about this, but the idea that like there's window books and mirror books. And mirror books are books that are like about characters similar to your own life. And then window books would be about characters that are very different from your own life. And she was saying that that's a great way to teach children about how other people in the world live to build empathy. And I was thinking with Eloise, that helped a lot too, was for her to understand how many places speak this other language. And if she has this language, it's a tool for friendship in these other places. And so even kind of reframing, obviously you have to get a child that's slightly older to understand like why would friendship even matter or why would traveling matter. Eloise has traveled, so she already knew that that's a really fun thing. But yeah, just to like frame it like as we get older as a family, then we can go to these places and eat their food and see people like this and engage, and how fun will that be? So books and movies for us have been really helpful.
100%. I say that. And if you have friends that speak the language and they have other kids, it really makes a difference. I mean, when not that long ago, when was it? My daughter started having a lot of resistance because she was out of toddler stage and she was not like my son just quite yet. And she started taking the lessons for their little wins. And I encourage parents, make sure you see those, because those are the ones that push you and like keep you going. We went to the grocery store, and that was a year ago, 2 years ago. And someone was walking and they speaking Spanish, and she goes, they're speaking Spanish. They see it. It is valuable to bring those experiences at an early age, because it does become their normal, and they will learn how to even navigate, whether it is your culture or not. It's easy for them to navigate those in the workforce and school. Like they're just going to be able to talk to people easily and adjust easily according to different cultures. So I say families, books, atención is, I was going to say this. There's this TV show my kids love for little kids. It's Puerto Rican. It's all in Spanish, and they learn little things like up and down, and they have fun songs. He loved it. He was one, and it's so good. Atención. I'll give it to you.
Where is it? What? Like,
you can find it on YouTube.
Oh, really?
You can find on YouTube.
Cool.
Yes. Encantos is another app that I'm very, very a big fan of, and it's for little kids, and they have songs as well online.
Awesome.
But cartoons definitely, and music and food.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that too. Especially because you can you literally ingest it. And so it's like this very physical way of like this new experience is going in. Like we're taking this inside of ourselves and incorporating it.
Yes. Yes.
When I was teaching preschool, one of the things that came up kind of often with children, particularly children who are like they're having to learn two languages while language is developing. And usually that's their family of origin speaks a particular language, and then they're coming out into other spaces and having to speak English and navigate there as well. But I've seen it go both directions, where the family's like, everyone speaks English and we're in this English speaking community, but our family's very committed to keeping this native language going like in our home. Sometimes parents will get nervous because sometimes language will develop a little bit later, or it appears like the language is developing a little later, like there's a delay because the child is just doing quite a bit more processing work, deciding how they're going to respond to you, or perhaps we don't know whether a small child is thinking in one language and translating into another, or like what that mechanic is. But I just feel like it's always a good thing to note of like, that's actually quite common. And there can be this little bit of how do we get these thoughts out? You can see this child trying so hard to get their thoughts out, but then actually actually, once they do master this language development, it's so beneficial to their brain and to their processing and to their cognition, like very soon after. But it can make people a little nervous in the toddler stage.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes. There was actually a lot of myths
go ahead.
about it. There are myths that it confuses, and unfortunately, that's why a lot of people stop. But that is a myth. It does not delay. In fact, if there is a delay, you will see in both languages.
Yeah, that's what it is. They're slower to speak in general.
Yeah, in general. It's not like just one language. And I think that you have to remember that your language will depend on the exposure you get. Again, once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. But it really is. Like, if you are mostly in a Spanish-speaking environment, but then that's going to be your dominant language, especially if you're a toddler, because you're not in school. Now, once that kid goes to school, that's what they're going to spend most of the time. In fact, that's when a lot of the resistance happens, because they're mostly surrounded by the language. So what you're saying, it has to do also to do which one are they getting mostly from. And yes, in some cases, like, it's just the way their brain is processing, but it does not mean that they are delayed, or it will be a reflection of both. And there are actually bilingual therapists that help you and talk about it. They're very advocate about it, because a lot of the times, unfortunately, even professionals say, no, just stop the language. And then because of that myth, and that happened a lot back in the day. But that's,
which is such a short-term result. When you do quit the one language, sometimes you can see a little spurt in the other one, but it's such short-term, and like, it's such a long-term loss for that. It's really just adult comfort. The adult feels a little uncomfortable because the language isn't coming out as quickly as they would like, and so it's kind of just grown-ups making themselves feel better instead of like staying the course and doing the thing that is so long-term enriching.
Totally. Yeah.
I agree.
So parents raising bilingual children, don't be surprised if they take a little bit longer to speak. Don't stop what you're doing. They'll speak, and they'll speak both languages, and it'll be amazing. Yeah. That's really important for people to know. Question someone asked is, you coming from these two worlds now, this American culture and your Colombian culture, what strengths do you see in each that might be different from one another? I think that's a beautiful question.
I was actually just even talking to my husband about it. I'm like, what do you like about you?
What do you like about you?
What is it that drew me to you? I think that I'm going to speak about Colombia in particular, because even though we're Latin culture, like, we're so different as well. But this is actually something in particular that a lot of countries realize, that how family oriented we are. We're very community driven, let's say that. And not that obviously other cultures are not. I'd say we just take it to a different level. I think that one of the things that he doesn't make fun, he teases me about is, like, I say, hey, I just met another of my cousins. Which one is it? First, third, second, third grade? Because we feel and we talk like we're cousins. Like, this is just my cousin and my cousin and my cousin and my cousin. And I think that we love community. We love people. So you see birthday parties with kids, but then you have an event for the events for the parents are there. And we just have any excuse to get together. And I really love that. And about the American culture, I love how many opportunities there are for natural talent. I think that since you're very little, you nurture that talent. If you, whatever, football, soccer, you could have a career, or painting, or, there's more opportunities for natural talent. That I think is very beautiful, because it helps kids, find their own thing. And unfortunately, not obviously, at least in Colombia, sometimes that's not possible. And it depends also on your resources. I think that there is a lot of things here that can happen. So I think that's one thing I really like here.
So cool. It's a great answer. Lily, is there anything else you want to say to our people before we wrap up today?
Well, one, I say there was no parent ever said, I regret raising my kid bilingual. There's no parent that ever said that. So yes, you're going to face hardship. That sounds really dramatic. You're going to face hardship. No, there are ups and downs. Some things are not going to come easy, and that's okay. It's a journey. Don't look at it as this, I don't know, it's not a sprint, it's a journey. This is something you're navigating, and your bilingualism is going to be different than mine. In fact, there are times in life that your language is not going to be the same. Like right now, I have a lot of business jargon in English that if you ask me in Spanish, I'm going to have to research and look it up and see how you say it, because even like the expressions might sound different. So it looks different, and don't beat yourself up for that. If your kid is not speaking like another kid, it's because they have different environment. Perhaps where they go to a dual language school, they have more family, you just don't know. So you need to find grace, because I feel like parents, I mean, for the longest time, being a Colombian, I'm like, oh my gosh, my kids are not speaking Spanish yet. Like, it's easy for me to think shameful thing. For me, it's like, oh I'm failing as a mom, as a Colombian mom, passing my roots to my kids. And I needed to think it's about them, and there are both cultures. No one, no the other. No, my culture is not better than the other. You're both, and you're beautiful the both ways, whatever it is. And I know that my son's bicultural identity will look different than my daughter's, because both will grab different things from both cultures differently and identify with them according to what they want. And I need to respect that, because they're not going to love my country the way I do. They are not there. They were not there. They experienced in a different way. And I think that it's important for parents, for us to respect that and value it. Do not give up. There are people that are raising bilingual kids. They're doing bilingual parenting, and we're supporting each other. So find your tribe, because you'll need them, and think of why you're doing it, because that's going to be what's going to drive you to keep going.
That's great.
If it's strong enough, that's what's like, okay, I want my kid. The end goal, it's much bigger than the little roadblocks that you'll face throughout this journey. And it will pass fast. It will. Right. It really will. But yes, I think that's my encouragement. And check out Lingo Plaza.
Right. Oh, thank you, Lily, so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you really enjoyed it. So yeah, in the next few weeks, Lily is coming to Los Angeles, and we're going to do a collaboration together, and it's going to be really special. I would love for you to be a part of it. Best way for you to find out about it would be to check our Instagram or join our community if you haven't already. That's also where you will have more access to Lane and I. You can join Zoom calls that we lead. We'd love to know you. And yeah, if you happen to be local, come to our meetups or this event with Lily. Awesome. Thanks. Bye.